Two tiny shapes stood in the middle of a snowy Michigan road, trembling, silent, and too young to understand why their mother would never rise again. Beside the road, their mother lay still after a winter accident. A small, broken bell hanging from her collar, its sound cracked by the cold wind. No one was supposed to find them that morning. Miles away, Navy SEAL Daniel Brooks was driving through Harbor Pines on a winter safety mission, a man who trusted rules more than feelings, and distance more than grief. He thought this was just another road to inspect. But when his headlights caught two German Shepherd puppies refusing to leave the snow, one question followed him into the storm. Why did those two puppies keep listening for a bell that could no longer call their mother home? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late morning settled over Harbor Pines, Michigan, with the pale patience of a winter that had forgotten how to end. Snow moved softly across the road, not falling hard enough to be called a storm, but steady enough to blur the pine trees and turn the world into a place of white edges and swallowed sound. Along the northern route that curved away from town toward the lake road, the mailboxes stood like small, frozen sentries, half-buried and leaning, each one marking a home where somebody old might be boiling coffee, counting pills, or pretending not to need anyone. If a man could do everything right and still lose what mattered, what was he supposed to trust afterward? Navy SEAL Daniel Brooks had never found an answer that satisfied him. At 41, Daniel looked like a man carved by hard weather and harder discipline. Tall, broad-shouldered, handsome in a severe, uninviting way, with short, dark brown hair touched faintly with gray at the temples, a strong, angular jaw, and a neatly trimmed beard that made his face seem even more guarded. His eyes were gray-blue, steady and watchful, the kind of eyes people trusted in emergencies, but rarely invited into warm kitchens. He wore a plain winter jacket over his working uniform, boots dusted with road salt, and gloves stiff from cold. Nothing about him looked careless. Even the notebook on the passenger seat of his county-issued vehicle sat square to the dashboard, as if it had been ordered to behave. Daniel had been sent to Harbor Pines for a winter safety support program, a polite name for a mission he privately considered too small for a man trained to move through danger with silence and precision. He was supposed to inspect evacuation routes, identify roads where older residents could be trapped during storms, mark weak cellular zones, and help the local clinic prepare for emergency checks. It was useful work, he knew that. Useful did not mean easy to respect. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a colder voice kept telling him that he had been placed here because people above him no longer trusted his judgment around grief. That accusation was not entirely unfair. Years earlier, Daniel had followed procedure during a rescue that still visited him at night. He had made the approved call, waited for the approved window, followed the approved extraction order. On paper, he had done nothing wrong. A teammate had still not come home. Since then, Daniel had trusted rules more than instinct, distance more than tenderness, and checklists more than the dangerous softness of caring too much. Feelings, in his experience, made men reach too soon or freeze too late. Procedure, at least, had clean lines. He drove slowly now, one hand on the wheel, the other reaching every few minutes for a pencil. "Mile marker 12, he muttered, glancing toward a bend where snowbanks narrowed the road. Poor visibility, no reflector, weak signal. He wrote the note without stopping. Farther ahead, another cabin appeared through the trees, smoke lifting faintly from its chimney. Daniel marked it on the route map. Elderly resident, long driveway, limited plow access. He did not know the person inside. He did not need to. Names complicated things. Numbers behaved. A few miles closer to town, Margaret Wilson stood in her small kitchen with one hand on the sink and the other wrapped around a mug of tea gone lukewarm. Margaret was 74, slender and slightly stooped, with soft brown skin lined by age, silver hair pinned in a loose bun, and dark eyes that still carried the sharpness of the music teacher she had once been. For 38 years, she had taught children to sit straight, breathe from the belly, and sing even when their voices cracked. She had the kind of wit that arrived dry as toast and twice as necessary. Since her husband died, humor had become the little candle she kept striking in a room that often felt too large. On the porch outside her kitchen door hung a small, cracked brass bell. It had once belonged to an ice cream cart that rolled through Harbor Pines decades ago, back when children chased summer as if it might be caught. Margaret had rescued the bell from a church rummage box, tied a ribbon through it, and used it each evening to call a stray German shepherd mother from the trees. The dog was not Margaret's, not officially. The dog had appeared near the boat landing in late autumn, ribs showing beneath a sable coat, eyes wary, belly heavy with unborn pups. Margaret had told herself she was only helping a little. Only food, only water, only a blanket under the back steps when the nights turned cruel. People lied most tenderly to themselves when they were lonely. That morning, Margaret had rung the bell twice. Its note came out uneven and hoarse, a broken little song that never traveled far, but always far enough. Usually, the mother dog would emerge from the pines after a minute or two, cautious but hopeful, ears high, paws delicate in the snow. Today, the trees gave nothing back. Margaret waited anyway. She tapped the mug with one fingernail and said to the empty kitchen, "Well, even a stray knows when to find better company." The joke sounded thin. The porch light stayed on. Daniel was rounding the bend near mile marker 12 when he saw the first shape in the road, then the second. At first, his mind rejected them as scraps of blown trash or fallen branches. Then one moved. He eased off the gas. 2 German shepherd puppies stood between the tire tracks, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. Black and tan coats clumped with snow, paws too large for their bodies, ears still undecided between courage and collapse. One was slightly bigger and stood in front, trembling but rigid, as if its small body had been appointed guardian of the entire road. The smaller puppy pressed close behind, head low, eyes wide and glassy with cold. Neither barked. That silence bothered Daniel more than noise would have. He stopped the vehicle several yards away, switched on the hazard lights, and stepped out into the wind. "Easy," he said, though his voice came out more like a command than comfort. He scanned first, not at the puppies, but around them. Tree line, shoulder, ditch, tire marks, blind curve. Training moved through him before feeling had a chance. Secure the scene, identify danger, prevent secondary accident, call it in. Then he saw the mother. She lay still beside the road where the snow had drifted against the shoulder, a grown German shepherd with a sable coat and a narrow collar darkened by weather. She had died after a winter accident, close enough that her puppies must have watched, and far enough from the lane that passing drivers might have missed her entirely. Daniel's jaw tightened. He did not go soft, not visibly. He simply stood a little straighter, as men sometimes do when something inside them bends. He radioed the location with clipped precision. 2 surviving pups, adult dog deceased, possible vehicle strike, road hazard present. Request animal control and clinic notification. His words were clean, useful, and almost empty. The larger puppy backed toward its sibling when Daniel took one step closer. The smaller one shivered so hard its front legs nearly folded. Daniel held out one gloved hand, then stopped himself. Too fast, too high. He crouched instead, slow and careful, though patience felt unnatural against the cold. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said quietly. The larger puppy did not believe him. Daniel could hardly blame it. As he shifted nearer to the mother dog, something small moved against her collar. A bell. Brass cracked along one side, tied with a faded bit of blue ribbon. Daniel lifted it gently. The bell gave a rough, broken note, hardly more than a wounded whisper of sound. Both puppies raised their heads at once. The movement was so immediate, so full of aching recognition, that Daniel went still. The smaller puppy took half a step forward, then stopped. The larger one looked from the bell to Daniel, fear and need wrestling in its tiny face. For the first time that morning, Daniel forgot to check the road, forgot the notebook, forgot the map of elderly residents and weak signals and approved procedures. The bell trembled in his gloved hand, imperfect and stubborn, carrying a sound that meant mother, food, warmth, return. Daniel understood only one thing clearly. Whatever this was, it could not be handled from a distance. The wind sharpened near the bend after Daniel stopped the vehicle, carrying loose snow across the road in thin white ribbons. Morning had not yet become afternoon, but the sky already looked tired, as if Harbor Pines had pulled a gray blanket over its own face. The hazard lights blinked behind Daniel in slow amber pulses, flashing against snowbanks, pine trunks, and the two tiny German Shepherd puppies who stood in the tire tracks as if the whole road belonged to their grief. Daniel stayed crouched, the cracked brass bell resting in his gloved hand. He had handled frightened adults, wounded soldiers, panicked civilians, men whose anger came with knives and men whose fear came with silence. None of that helped much with two puppies who had learned in one brutal morning that the world could move too fast and take too much. The larger puppy stood in front of the smaller one, black and tan fur bristling along its narrow back, oversized paws planted wide, small teeth showing in a trembling warning. The little guardian could barely keep balance, yet every inch of its body said no. The smaller puppy pressed close behind, wet muzzle lifted toward the place where the mother dog lay still near the shoulder, its eyes fixed there with a kind of confusion that Daniel had seen before in people outside hospital rooms, people waiting for someone to stand up, breathe, answer, return. "Easy," Daniel said again, and this time he tried to remove the command from his voice. It felt strange, almost embarrassing, like using a language he had learned in childhood and then refused to speak for years. I know you don't want me near you," the larger puppy answered with a thin growl, high and ragged, more fear than threat. Daniel looked toward the curve behind him. A vehicle coming too quickly would have little time to stop. Procedure returned like a stern old teacher. Secure survivors, clear roadway, prevent additional risk, wait for support. But the puppies did not care about procedure. The bigger one cared only about keeping a human hand away from its sibling. The smaller one cared only about the silent shape in the snow and the broken bell that had once meant warmth. Daniel opened the rear door of the county vehicle and pulled out an emergency blanket, a towel, and the sandwich he had bought at the gas station before sunrise. Turkey, dry bread, mustard he had not wanted, wrapped by a teenager who had looked half asleep behind the counter. Daniel tore off a tiny piece of turkey and placed it on the snow between himself and the puppies. The larger one stared at the food, then at Daniel, deeply suspicious. "Fair?" Daniel muttered. "I wouldn't trust gas station turkey either." The joke surprised him by existing. It had nowhere to go in the wind, but it softened something in his chest for 1 second. The smaller puppy sniffed weakly. The larger one snapped the turkey from the snow, swallowed, then resumed its post as if accepting food from an enemy was simply a tactical necessity. Several miles away, Margaret Wilson had finally picked up the phone. Her kitchen smelled faintly of lemon tea and old sheet music, the kind of paper scent that seems to live forever in homes where songs had once been practiced badly and with great hope. She called the Harbor Pines Clinic first, because that was where worried people called when they did not want to sound worried. Nurse Linda Harris answered on the third ring. Linda was 58, a sturdy woman with wide shoulders, short auburn hair threaded heavily with gray, pale, freckled skin, and a voice that could scold a man into taking his blood pressure medicine while making him believe the idea had been his own. Years at the small clinic had given her a habit of joking before fear could settle too deeply in a room. She had cared for broken wrists, winter coughs, lonely widowers, stubborn farmers, and at least 3 people who had come in claiming they had just slipped a little while looking like they had wrestled a snowplow. "Harbor Pines Clinic," Linda said. "If this is about Arthur Collins refusing his checkup again, tell him I am older than his excuses and meaner than his truck." Margaret gave a small laugh because Linda had offered her a place to put one. "It's not Arthur." Linda's smile faded before her voice changed. She knew Margaret's pauses. Everyone in town knew someone's pauses if they had lived there long enough. "What is it, honey?" "The dog didn't come," Margaret said. Linda leaned back in her chair. Behind her, the clinic waiting room hummed with fluorescent lights and the low cough of an old man reading a fishing magazine from 3 summers ago. "Lucy?" Margaret had not meant to name the dog out loud so often that other people remembered, but loneliness had a way of leaving fingerprints. "I rang the bell. Twice." "She always comes when she hears it." Margaret tried to make her tone light. "Maybe she found a better kitchen, one with bacon and less advice?" Linda did not laugh this time. "Did she have the pups with her last night?" "I heard them under the back steps," Margaret said. "Little squeaks, like rusty door hinges with opinions." The joke weakened at the end. "Linda, the porch feels wrong." Linda turned toward the window, where snow slid across the glass in restless lines. She thought of Margaret's porch light burning every evening, a small gold square against the dark. She also thought of the northern road, the bad bend, the missing reflectors people had complained about every winter and forgotten every spring. "Stay inside," Linda said gently. "I'm going to make a call." Back on the road, Daniel tried the towel next. He spread it on the snow, then backed away, letting the puppies decide whether it was a trap or mercy. The larger puppy limped 1 step forward, sniffed it, and sneezed. The smaller one wobbled, tried to follow, and nearly collapsed. Daniel moved without thinking, hand extending. The larger puppy lunged with a sharp little bark and caught the edge of his glove, not hard enough to break anything, hard enough to make a point. Daniel froze. His first instinct was irritation. His second was shame for the first. "All right," he said under his breath. "You made your point, Sergeant." The bigger puppy clung to the glove for 1 absurd second, growling like a kettle trying to boil, then released it and backed up. Daniel almost smiled. Almost. Somewhere inside the tight machinery of his grief, a small gear slipped out of alignment. His radio crackled, but the signal broke into static. The road swallowed half the transmission. Weak zone confirmed, he thought, because even now part of him was making notes. The sensible move would be to wait. Animal control could come with proper crates. The clinic could send someone trained. He could stand guard, keep traffic away, maintain distance. It would be correct. It would also leave 2 freezing puppies in the road, because correctness, Daniel had learned, often took its time putting on boots. He looked at the bell again. The brass was dull from age, cracked along one side, tied to a faded blue ribbon that had darkened with melted snow. Daniel held it low, close to the ground, and gave it the gentlest motion. The sound came out crooked, barely a note at all. Still, both puppies lifted their heads. The smaller puppy's ears twitched. The larger puppy stopped growling. "That's it," Daniel whispered. "I'm not calling her. I know I'm not." His throat tightened, surprising him. "I'm just telling you I heard it too." He set the bell on the towel, then eased back. The smaller puppy moved first, drawn by the sound or by memory, stepping with clumsy, shaking legs. The larger puppy followed immediately, shoulder pressed against the smaller one, unwilling to surrender command but too exhausted to maintain the war. Daniel waited until both were on the towel. Then, with a slowness that cost him more patience than any briefing ever had, he folded the edges up around them. The larger puppy growled once more, but weakly, as if keeping tradition alive. The smaller one did not resist. It tucked its nose toward the bell. Daniel lifted them together. They weighed almost nothing. That was the worst part. After all the noise in his head, all the rules, all the old ghosts marching in formation, the two lives in his arms were lighter than a field pack and more difficult to carry. He placed them on the rear seat, wrapped in the emergency blanket, then retrieved the cracked bell and set it beside them. Before closing the door, he looked once toward the mother dog beside the road. He did not make a promise. Daniel distrusted promises made in dramatic weather. He simply bowed his head for one brief breath, the kind of respect no manual required. As he drove toward the clinic, the smaller puppy shifted under the blanket and pressed its muzzle against the bell. The larger one stayed upright for as long as it could, watching Daniel in the rearview mirror with fierce, exhausted suspicion. Then even that tiny guard began to sway. Daniel glanced at his notebook on the passenger seat. The first line he had written earlier read, "2 animals for transfer." He reached over at the next stop sign, crossed it out with one hard stroke, and wrote beneath it, "2 German Shepherd puppies. Do not separate." By the time Daniel reached Harbor Pines Animal Clinic, late morning had turned the town into a watercolor of gray roofs, white streets, and yellow windows glowing faintly behind blowing snow. The clinic sat between a closed bait shop and a laundromat with a crooked sign, a low brick building with paw prints painted along the front window, and a flag snapping stiffly beside the door. It looked too small to hold much suffering. Daniel knew better. Small buildings often held the most of it. He parked close to the entrance and glanced into the back seat. The 2 German Shepherd puppies were wrapped together in the emergency blanket, their small bodies pressed so tightly against each other that they seemed less like 2 animals than one frightened heartbeat divided in half. The larger puppy's eyes were still open, still suspicious, still guarding. The smaller one had tucked its muzzle against the cracked brass bell, breathing in short, uneven tremors. Daniel sat for 1 second longer than necessary, hand on the steering wheel, jaw tight. He wanted a clean transfer. He wanted a form, a signature, a professional who would say, "We'll take it from here." He wanted to walk back into the cold with empty hands. Instead, the larger puppy growled when he opened the door. "Noted," Daniel murmured. "Still enemies." Inside, the clinic smelled of antiseptic, wet fur, coffee that had been burned beyond forgiveness, and something faintly sweet from a jar of peppermint candies on the counter. Linda Harris stood near the reception desk, her short, auburn-gray hair tucked behind one ear, a phone still in her hand. She had the solid, practical build of a woman who had spent decades lifting supply boxes, helping dizzy patients into chairs, and refusing to be impressed by male stubbornness. When she saw Daniel carrying the bundled puppies, her face changed. Not dramatically. Linda was not theatrical. Her mouth simply pressed into a line, and her eyes softened with worry. "Those are Lucy's?" she said. Daniel paused. "You know the mother?" "Half the town knew her without admitting it." Linda moved around the counter and held the door to the exam room open. "Sarah's in back. She's already clearing a table." Dr. Sarah Mitchell entered before Daniel could ask another question. She was 45, tall and lean, with copper-brown hair pulled into a messy knot, light olive skin marked by faint freckles, and green eyes that looked tired without looking weak. Her face had the sharp elegance of someone who had once laughed easily and now rationed laughter like medicine in short supply. She wore navy scrubs beneath a gray cardigan, and one sleeve was dusted with pale dog hair. There was a small scar near her left eyebrow, almost hidden unless she turned toward the light. Later, Daniel would learn it came from a frightened rescue horse years ago, back when Sarah still believed every wounded creature could be coaxed back into the world with enough patience. The scar had healed. The belief had not entirely survived. "Set them here," Sarah said, her voice low, controlled, already working. Daniel placed the puppies on the warmed exam table. The larger one tried to rise at once, legs shaking, teeth showing in a tiny, exhausted protest. Sarah did not flinch. She lowered her hand beside the puppy, not above it, and waited. "You're a brave little mess," she said. "Bad attitude, good instincts." The smaller puppy barely lifted its head. Sarah's expression tightened, but only for a moment. She checked gums, temperature, hydration, pause, breathing, and body condition with efficient tenderness. Daniel noticed that phrase before he had words for it. Efficient tenderness. She wasted no motion, yet nothing she did felt cold. Linda wrapped warm towels in the corner and handed them over without being asked, the kind of teamwork born not from policy but repetition. "The bigger one is cold, hungry, stressed, but responsive," Sarah said. "The little one is weaker, mild dehydration, slower reaction, needs warmth, fluids, food in small amounts, and monitoring. They're young, 6, maybe 7 weeks." She looked at Daniel. "Too young for this morning." Daniel folded his arms. "Can they be transferred to a rescue?" Sarah gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "Which one? The county shelter is full. Marquette's rescue has no foster space after last week's storm. The volunteer network is stretched thin, and half the roads are ugly. Nobody is waiting by the phone hoping for more heartbreak today." Linda winced at the bluntness, but Sarah did not apologize. Daniel respected that, which annoyed him. "I can transport," he said, "if distance is the issue." Sarah looked at him more carefully then. "Distance is rarely the only issue." Daniel felt the words land somewhere he did not want touched. He shifted his weight toward the door, creating space between himself and the table. He had done that all morning without noticing. Sarah noticed. People who worked with hurt animals became experts at distance, who used it for safety, who used it for control, who used it because closeness might ask for something. "You're the Navy man helping with winter checks," Sarah said. "Daniel Brooks." "I know. Linda told me." Sarah lifted the smaller puppy gently and slid a warm towel beneath its belly. "You've been mapping roads for the older residents." "That's the assignment." "The assignment," she repeated, not mocking him exactly, but not letting him hide inside the word either. Daniel's face remained still. He had practiced that for years. But the clinic, with its humming lights and frightened puppies and burned coffee, had a way of making stillness look less like strength and more like a locked door. He had not volunteered for Harbor Pines. After his last operational review, a Navy psychologist had written phrases Daniel hated with a precise professional calm. Emotional rigidity, over-reliance on procedural control, difficulty adapting when human distress alters mission priorities. His command had called the Michigan program Valuable Community Coordination. Daniel had heard exile in a polite uniform. Teaching elderly people how to pack emergency medication, checking driveways, marking signal gaps, it all felt like being asked to guard a candle after years of walking through fire. Now the candle was on the table, shivering under a towel. Sarah prepared a small feeding syringe. The bigger puppy watched every movement as if memorizing possible threats. "This one has opinions," Linda said. "He has fear," Sarah replied. "Opinions come later." The smaller puppies stirred when Daniel shifted the cracked bell on the counter. The brass gave a faint, broken note. Both puppies looked toward it instantly. Sarah froze. Linda did too. Sarah turned slowly. "Where did you get that?" "From the mother's collar." Sarah's face changed in a way Daniel had seen in people hearing a song from a funeral. "That bell belongs to Margaret Wilson." Linda crossed her arms around herself. For once, no joke came. Sarah touched the bell lightly with one finger. "Margaret taught music here for almost 40 years. Half this town learned Christmas carols from her, whether they wanted to or not. She used to make children stand straighter just by raising an eyebrow." A sad smile appeared and vanished.
Now people remember her when the church needs pies, when the school needs old sheet music, or when someone wants a polite widow at a fundraiser.
Daniel looked through the window at the snow blowing past the glass. "She called about the dog?" Linda nodded. "She knew something was wrong." Sarah picked up the bell and placed it in Daniel's hand. "Then she deserves to hear it from someone who was there." Daniel looked at the two puppies. The smaller one had closed its eyes, muzzle pointed toward the sound. The larger one remained awake, still guarding, still doubtful, as if Daniel's character had not yet been properly evaluated. "I'm not good at that kind of conversation," Daniel said. Sarah met his gaze. "Most people aren't. They just go anyway." The bell sat cold and uneven in his palm. Daniel wanted to hand it back, to say the clinic should call, to let Linda soften the news with the right local words. But he had been the one on the road. He had heard the bell answer the puppies. He had seen what silence looked like beside the snow. For the second time that day, procedure offered him a clean exit. For the second time, it was not enough. The afternoon had gone dim by the time Daniel drove away from Harbor Pines Animal Clinic, though the clock insisted the day was still young. Snow drifted lightly over the windshield, and the road ahead looked less like pavement than a pale ribbon someone had dropped between the pines and forgotten to pick up. The cracked brass bell lay on the passenger seat inside a folded towel. It did not look important there. It looked small, dull, and defeated, like something a person might find in a drawer after a lifetime had already passed. Still, Daniel kept glancing at it as if it might accuse him of taking too long. Margaret Wilson's house stood at the edge of town, where the last streetlights ended and the forest began. It was a narrow white cottage, with blue shutters, a sagging porch, and a line of frozen wind chimes hanging from the eaves like glass bones. A wooden chair sat near the railing, turned toward the trees instead of the road. Beside the chair was a metal bowl, half filled with snow, and under the porch steps Daniel saw an old, folded blanket tucked into a cardboard box. The place had the careful loneliness of a home kept neat because disorder would be too honest. Daniel parked, but did not get out immediately. He had delivered difficult news before. He had stood in rooms where people understood a loss before anyone said the words. Yet those rooms had always come with uniforms, chaplains, paperwork, a structure built to hold grief upright for a few minutes. This was different. This was one elderly woman, one broken bell, one stray dog who had never officially belonged to anyone, and two puppies waiting under clinic towels for a world kinder than the one they had first met. He knocked twice. Margaret opened the door slowly, one hand resting on the frame. She was small in the doorway, but not fragile in the simple way strangers might assume. At 74, she carried age like a long winter coat, heavy, familiar, and worn with dignity. Her silver hair was pinned loosely at the back of her head, though several curls had escaped around her temples. Her face was lined softly, her brown eyes alert behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her cardigan was buttoned unevenly, as if she had dressed while listening for something outside. Daniel noticed her hands first. They were slender, veined, and slightly bent at the knuckles, the hands of a woman who had spent decades conducting songs, correcting posture, and tapping rhythm onto piano wood. "You're the Navy man," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Daniel Brooks." "I know. Linda called and said you might come." Margaret looked past him toward the road. She used her gentle voice. Linda only uses that voice when she is about to tell you not to panic, which is a sure sign panic has already found the driveway. Daniel removed his hat. "May I come in?" Margaret stepped aside. Her kitchen was warm and smelled of lemon tea, cinnamon toast, and old books. Sheet music sat stacked beside a radio. The framed photograph on the wall showed a younger Margaret standing before a school choir, one hand lifted, mouth open mid-instruction. In the picture, she looked commanding and full of light. In the kitchen, that light had narrowed, but it had not gone out. Daniel stood near the table, too straight, too formal. "Mrs. Wilson, this morning I found a German shepherd on the northern road near mile marker 12. She had been struck by a vehicle. She was off the shoulder when I arrived." He paused, hating the shape of every word. "She didn't survive." Margaret did not sit down at first. She simply blinked once, then again, as if her eyes had received the news before the rest of her could bear it. "Lucy," she said. Daniel waited. "Her name was Lucy." Margaret pulled out a chair and lowered herself into it. Her gaze drifted toward the porch door. "Not that she ever agreed to it officially. She had the manner of a duchess who found my naming attempts beneath her." Daniel placed the folded towel on the table and opened it. The cracked bell rested in the center. Margaret's face changed then, not with shock, with recognition so deep it looked almost physical. She reached for the bell, but her fingers stopped just above it. "It always sounded wrong," she whispered. "Even before it cracked, it never rang sweet. My husband used to say that bell had been educated by a goose." Daniel did not know what to say. Margaret picked it up at last. The brass trembled lightly in her hand. "I rang it this morning," she said. "Twice. She always came when she heard this. Always. Except today." Silence filled the kitchen, and Daniel did not try to rescue it. He had learned that some silences were not empty. Some were rooms where grief removed its coat and sat down. Margaret turned the bell slowly. "Lucy showed up near the boat landing in November. Thin as a broom handle, proud as a queen, and already carrying those babies." Someone had left her there. I could tell by the way she watched cars, not like she expected danger, like she expected someone to come back and apologize. Her mouth tightened. People do that sometimes. Leave a creature behind and let the world finish the sentence. "You fed her," Daniel said. "I did." Margaret looked embarrassed by the confession, which struck Daniel as strange and sad. "But I didn't bring her in. I told myself I was too old for a dog, too old for midnight barking, vet bills, muddy paws, loving something that might leave before I was ready." A dry little laugh escaped her. "As if age has ever protected anyone from heartbreak. Age just gives heartbreak better aim." Daniel looked at the sheet music on the counter, at the empty bowl by the door, at the chair facing the woods. "The puppies are alive." Margaret closed her eyes. "They're at the clinic," he continued, "cold and scared. The smaller one is weaker, but Dr. Mitchell thinks both have a chance." Margaret held a bell against her chest. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she opened her eyes, they were wet but steady. "I'd like to see them." Daniel should have said they were resting. You should have said Sarah wanted them monitored. He should have made a call first, arranged the timing, followed a sensible order. Instead, he heard Sarah's voice in his mind. Most people aren't good at that kind of conversation. They just go anyway. "I can take you," he said. At the clinic, Sarah had moved the puppies into a small heated recovery space lined with towels. Linda stood nearby with a clipboard she was not actually reading. When Margaret entered, the room seemed to hold its breath. The larger puppy lifted its head at once, ears uneven, eyes sharp with fear. The smaller one tucked itself closer to the blanket, only its nose and dark, frightened eyes visible. Margaret did not rush forward. She knelt with effort, Daniel instinctively stepping closer in case she needed help, though she waved him off with the pride of a retired teacher refusing assistance from a student who had not raised his hand. "Hello, little ones," she said softly. The larger puppy growled. Daniel stiffened. Sarah did not. Margaret only nodded, as if the puppy had made a reasonable point in a staff meeting. "Yes," she said. "I suppose I would feel the same." The smaller puppy slipped behind Daniel's boot, trembling. Daniel looked down, startled by the trust he had not asked for and did not feel qualified to receive. Margaret set the cracked bell on the floor between them. It made no sound this time. It simply rested there, dull and wounded and known. "That's all right," Margaret whispered. "Trusting someone is a hard song to learn." Daniel stood in the doorway, listening to the old woman speak to two frightened puppies, as if fear itself were a student worth teaching gently. And for reasons he could not yet name, the words found him, too. By late afternoon, the snow over Harbor Pines had settled into a quieter kind of falling, less like weather and more like a thought the town could not shake. The animal clinic's small recovery room was already full. An old beagle recovering from surgery, a gray barn cat with frost-bitten ears, and a nervous terrier who barked every time the furnace clicked. Sarah Mitchell stood in the hallway with one hand on her hip, looking at the two German Shepherd puppies wrapped together in warm towels, and made the decision with the weary practicality of someone who had been forced to choose between imperfect options for too many winters. "We'll move them to the community station," she said. "It has heat, space, and Linda can keep eyes on them when I can't. Daniel, you can help." Daniel almost said that he had route reports to finish. The words lined up neatly in his head, polished and useless. Then the smaller puppy stirred at the sound of the cracked bell in Margaret's hand, and the excuse lost its shape. "Understood," he said. The Harbor Pines Community Station had once been a volunteer firehouse, a square red building with chipped paint, a faded flag by the door, and a meeting room that smelled of coffee, old wood, and floor polish. It served as everything the town needed when there was nowhere else to go: warming center, storm shelter, voting hall, lost and found, and on one memorable Thanksgiving, a battlefield between two rival cranberry sauce recipes. Linda Harris unlocked the side door and began giving orders before anyone could pretend not to need them. "Blankets on that table, warm water there. Sarah, you get the thermometer. Navy man, wash your hands and try not to organize my cupboards by rank." Daniel looked at her. Linda smiled without apology. "I've met your type." Sarah set up a temporary care area in the corner near a humming radiator. Daniel helped because he was told to, and because tasks gave his hands something to do besides betray him. He unfolded towels with military precision, checked the temperature of the warmed milk replacer exactly as Sarah instructed, and wrote times in his notebook: feeding attempt, body warmth, response level. He made the work look like an emergency drill. Sarah noticed. Margaret noticed, too, though she said nothing. The larger puppy remained awake, tense and suspicious, its black and tan fur fluffed unevenly from towel drying, ears tilting at different angles like two thoughts arguing. Every time Daniel moved too quickly, the little dog shifted in front of the smaller one. The smaller puppy was weaker, narrow through the ribs, with a damp muzzle, oversized paws, and eyes that seemed too large for its face. It did not want the feeding syringe unless the bell sounded first. Margaret learned this before anyone else. She sat in a folding chair, the cracked brass bell in her lap, and gave it the faintest touch whenever Sarah tried to feed the little one. The bell answered in its broken, hoarse note. Only then would the puppy swallow. "Well," Linda said from the doorway, "apparently the bell has better bedside manner than all of us." "It always did," Margaret replied.
Daniel glanced at the old teacher. She had removed her gloves, and her hands rested quietly around the bell, bent fingers protecting it as if it were a bird with a damaged wing. Margaret did not try to pick up either puppy. She did not coo too loudly or claim them with grief. She simply stayed near enough to be known and far enough not to demand. After a while, she began to sing under her breath, an old classroom song about keeping rhythm with the rain. Her voice was thin now, but it carried a gentle steadiness, the kind children might have trusted without knowing why. Daniel found himself listening despite his best efforts. There were songs, he thought, that did not ask a man to believe in miracles. They only asked him to stop making noise long enough to hear what was still alive.
Across the building, Linda sat at a desk with a yellow legal pad and a town directory open beside her. She had started a list of older residents on roads likely to become dangerous when storms worsened. Some names she wrote from memory, others she called. Her voice changed with each person. Firm for the stubborn, sweet for the frightened, falsely casual for the proud.
"No, Mr. Collins, it is not a government plot. It is a phone list. Yes, I know you have a generator. Yes, I also know it only works when your nephew comes over and swears at it."
Arthur Collins arrived 20 minutes later in person, offended by the idea that he could be managed by telephone. He was 82, broad through the chest despite his age, with a square, weathered face, thick white eyebrows, a full white beard trimmed badly, and hands that looked permanently shaped by tools. A retired mechanic and lifelong widower of 2 wives, Arthur moved with a cane, but carried himself like the cane was merely a prop in a play he disliked. His eyes were pale blue and mischievous, though loneliness sat behind them like a room with the curtains drawn. "I survived 2 marriages, 3 layoffs, and a snowmobile accident involving a preacher," Arthur announced. "A little weather does not scare me." Linda did not look up. "Your name stays on the list." Arthur pointed his cane toward Daniel. "What's he doing here?" "Trying to defeat puppies," Linda said. Arthur turned, saw the care corner, and softened before he could hide it. "Those Lucy's?" Margaret nodded. For once, Arthur said nothing clever. He removed his cap and held it against his chest, looking older than he had at the door. Then the larger puppy growled at him from the towel pile. Arthur's eyebrows lifted. "Good. At least one of us still has manners." A small laugh moved through the room. It did not erase the sadness, it simply made space beside it. As evening pressed against the windows, the puppies changed by inches. The larger one stopped growling every time Margaret lowered her hand near the towel. It did not accept her touch, not exactly, but it allowed her hand to rest close by. The smaller puppy drank a little more. Then, after a long hesitation, wobbled toward Daniel's boot and collapsed against it in sleep. Daniel looked down as if the puppy had violated a security perimeter. No one commented. Sarah wisely pretended to adjust supplies. Linda pretended to read her list. Margaret pretended not to smile. Daniel did not move his foot. Later, Sarah stood with her clipboard and tapped the pen once against the paper. "I need something to call them in the file. Temporary names are fine." Margaret looked at the larger puppy first. It was still upright, still guarding, still determined to look braver than its body allowed. "Charlie," she said softly. "I once knew a church custodian named Charlie who guarded every door like heaven had hired him personally." Then she looked at the smaller puppy, asleep beside Daniel's boot, one ear twitching at the faintest echo of the bell. Margaret's face warmed with a memory. "Tucker," she said. "After a boy in my 3rd grade choir. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket, but he sang louder than anyone." Sarah wrote the names down. Daniel expected himself to object. Names created attachment. Attachment created pain. He knew the sequence well. But the larger puppy, Charlie, rested its chin on the towel, and the smaller one, Tucker, sighed against his boot like a tiny bellows feeding a fragile fire.
Daniel said nothing. For the first time, they were not two cases, two survivors, or two animals for transfer. They were Charlie and Tucker. And somehow the room grew warmer after that. Morning came to Harbor Pines with a hard, blue cold that made every roof shine and every sound travel farther than it should. The storm had paused, but not surrendered. Snow lay packed along the curbs and piled against the windows of the community station, where Charlie and Tucker slept in a towel-lined crate near the radiator as if their small bodies had finally believed, for a few hours, that warmth would not be taken away. Daniel Brooks stood at the folding table with 3 maps spread before him, a county accident form beside his coffee, and the cracked brass bell placed near the edge like a witness too small to swear an oath. The puppies had names now. That changed nothing in a legal sense. It changed too much in every other sense. Daniel had asked Linda for the road file before dawn. She had given him a cardboard folder with the tired expression of a woman handing over something everyone in town knew existed and no one wanted to discuss. Inside were complaints written in different handwriting across several winters. Poor visibility near the northern bend, no reflective markers, plow berms narrowing the shoulder, unreliable cell service between mile markers 11 and 13. One note had been written by Margaret Wilson 2 months earlier, her careful teacher's script still graceful despite a slight tremble. The road disappears in blowing snow. Someone will be hurt here. Daniel read the sentence 3 times. Someone had been hurt there. The fact that the victim had been a stray dog did not make the warning less true. He drove back to the curve before noon, not because procedure required a second inspection, but because something in him refused to leave the place as a line on paper. The road looked ordinary in daylight, which made it worse. A stand of black spruce crowded the shoulder. The bend dipped slightly before turning, creating a blind pocket where drifting snow collected. The old wooden sign warning drivers to slow down had faded to the color of dirty bone. The metal reflector posts ended a quarter-mile too soon, as if the road itself had simply grown tired of being seen. Daniel checked his phone. No signal. His radio crackled once, then dissolved into static. He stood in the silence, boots planted where he had first seen the puppies. Nothing dramatic revealed itself. No villain. No grand secret. Only neglect, layered year after year until it became landscape. Daniel knew that kind of danger. It did not arrive with teeth bared. It arrived as a delayed repair, a missing signature, a budget discussion postponed until spring, a complaint filed and forgotten because no one had died yet. He hated how familiar that felt. He had built his life around procedure, but procedure without persistence was only a polite way to abandon responsibility. At the clinic, Sarah Mitchell was cleaning an exam table with more force than the table deserved. Her copper-brown hair had slipped loose from its knot, and a tired strand clung near the small scar by her eyebrow. She had been awake most of the night, checking on a feverish barn cat, and answering calls about frozen paws, limping dogs, and one very insulted parrot, whose owner insisted the bird had seasonal mood problems. Sarah had laughed at that call, but only after hanging up. Lately, laughter felt like something she had to sneak past herself. Linda found her in the supply room, staring at a shelf of donated food that had dwindled to 3 cans and a torn bag of kibble. "You look like you're about to declare war on chicken-flavored pâté," Linda said. Sarah closed her eyes. "I used to think I was good at this because I cared." "You are good at this." "No, I'm still here. That's not the same thing." Sarah leaned against the shelf, tall frame folded inward by exhaustion. "Every winter, more animals get left behind, more people can't pay, more calls come too late. I keep telling myself I'm getting practical, but maybe I'm just getting hard." Linda's face softened. "Hard people don't warm towels at 2 in the morning. Sarah tried to answer, but the words did not come. Through the doorway, she could see Margaret sitting beside Charlie and Tucker, the cracked bell in her lap. The old woman was not doing anything heroic. She was simply present, singing very softly whenever Tucker stirred. Sarah watched the way Margaret's hand trembled and still stayed gentle. Maybe that was what finally broke through the wall inside her. She was not tired because she had stopped caring. She was tired because she had been caring in rooms too small, with too few hands for too long. By late afternoon, Linda's phone list had become a town project without anyone officially approving it. Mabel O'Connor arrived first, a 77-year-old church widow with round cheeks, silver curls tucked beneath a knitted hat, and the brisk authority of a woman who had organized funeral luncheons, Christmas pageants, and one legendary bake sale during a power outage. She brought a pot of chicken soup large enough to baptize a small child in. Behind her came Jean Booker, 69, tall and narrow, with dark skin, elegant posture, and a dry voice that made even kindness sound like a court ruling. She carried folded fleece squares for animal bedding and announced, "If these puppies are going to recover, they will do it on something better than old towels." Arthur Collins returned with a box of flashlights, batteries, and 3 extension cords knotted together like captured snakes. He claimed he had only come because Linda's list was administratively offensive. But he stayed to test the portable heater and repair a loose hinge on the supply cabinet. Daniel watched the old mechanic work, broad hands steady despite swollen knuckles. The room filled slowly with soup steam, murmured phone calls, paper lists, and the strange, imperfect music of people pretending they were not forming a rescue network. That evening, Daniel pinned his marked map to the community station bulletin board. Red circles showed homes on difficult roads. Blue marks showed weak signal areas. A black X marked the curve where Lucy had died. No one spoke for a moment. Then Mabel touched the X with one gloved finger and whispered, "Poor girl." Daniel had no answer. Night settled heavy and cold. Sarah gave final instructions for the puppies: small feedings, warmth, no crowding, no unnecessary handling. Let them regulate. Let them feel safe. Daniel nodded through each point. He understood instructions. Instructions were mercifully clear. But later, when the building quieted and the volunteers went home, wind struck the old firehouse doors with a low boom. Tucker woke, crying. It was not loud. That made it worse. It was a thin, broken sound, the kind that seemed to come from a place before language. Charlie lifted his head and pressed close, but Tucker kept shaking. Daniel stood near the crate, Sarah's instructions lined up in his head like soldiers. Do not overhandle, avoid dependency, allow rest. Tucker cried again. Daniel exhaled slowly, then sat down on the floor. He did not reach into the crate. He did not scoop Tucker up. He placed the cracked bell on the floor between himself and the puppies and gave it the faintest touch. The crooked note trembled in the dim room. Charlie watched him, wary but no longer growling. Tucker blinked, then crawled forward 1 small inch, then another, until his nose rested near the bell. Daniel stayed still, back against the wall, knees bent, hands open. For once, he did not try to fix the moment. He only remained inside it. And in the fragile quiet between the wind and the bell, trust began as something almost too small to see. Evening came down over Harbor Pines with a brittle cold that made the street lamps look lonely. Snow had stopped falling, but the town still carried the mood of a storm, the kind that stayed in people's shoulders after the clouds moved on. The community station meeting hall filled slowly, not because anyone was eager to come, but because Harbor Pines was small enough that absence could feel like a statement. Folding chairs scraped across the old wooden floor, coffee hissed in a dented silver urn. Charlie and Tucker rested in a towel-lined crate near Margaret Wilson's chair,
both wrapped in donated fleece, two small German Shepherd puppies unaware that a room full of adults was about to debate whether the place where their mother died was worth fixing. Daniel Brooks stood near the bulletin board with his marked map, tall and still, his broad shoulders squared beneath his winter jacket. He had faced mission briefings with less resistance in the air. This was not fear, he sensed. It was something more stubborn. Inconvenience dressed up as caution. Ellen Price, the town supervisor, called the meeting to order with a wooden pencil tapped against a clipboard. Ellen was 62, short and compact, with a steel-gray bob, clear brown eyes, and the calm, clipped voice of a woman who had spent years balancing budgets that never balanced back. She wore a navy coat over a red sweater and practical boots still crusted with salt. People respected her because she remembered details. People avoided her because she remembered excuses, too. Beside her sat Frank Palmer, the road committee treasurer, 68, thin as a fence rail, with a long, pale face, wire glasses, and a gray mustache that twitched whenever money was mentioned. Frank was not cruel. He was the kind of man who believed a town could be saved by saying no often enough. Daniel pointed to the map. The northern bend between mile markers 11 and 13 has 3 problems: poor visibility, no reflective markers through the curve, and unreliable communication. During snowdrift, the shoulder disappears. A driver coming too fast won't see what's in the road until it's too late. Frank cleared his throat. With respect, Commander, everyone here knows that curve is unpleasant. That doesn't mean we can invent money. Nobody's asking you to invent it, Linda Harris said from the back, arms folded. Though if you can, I'd like a clinic roof that doesn't leak into the supply closet. A few people laughed. Frank did not. Daniel kept his eyes on the map. Temporary reflectors are inexpensive. A warning sign can be installed before the next heavy storm. A volunteer check-in network costs almost nothing. The signal issue will take longer, but we can mark the dead zone and establish radio checkpoints. Ellen nodded slowly. That part is realistic. A man near the coffee urn muttered, "All this because of a dog?" The room changed. It was not loud. No one gasped, no one stood dramatically, but Margaret Wilson's hand stopped moving over Tucker's blanket. Tucker was asleep near the front of the crate, his small muzzle tucked toward the cracked brass bell. Charlie, always more suspicious of the world, lifted his head and stared at the room as if he had heard the sentence and found it lacking. Margaret rose carefully. Daniel moved half a step, ready to steady her, but she did not need him. She held herself with the old dignity of a teacher about to correct a classroom without raising her voice. Her silver hair was pinned neatly tonight, her cardigan buttoned straight, her wire-rimmed glasses low on her nose. Age had narrowed her body, but not her presence. "No," Margaret said, "not all this because of a dog." The room fell quiet. All this because a dangerous road was allowed to remain dangerous until something small enough to ignore paid the price. She looked at the map, not at the man who had spoken. Lucy was astray, I understand that. She did not pay taxes, attend church, or vote in town meetings, though I suspect she would have had opinions. But she kept those pups alive through nights that would make some of us complain before supper. She crossed that road because she was trying to feed them, warm them, carry on in the only way she knew. Margaret's voice trembled once, then steadied. And we, with our committees and calendars and coffee, could not manage to place one proper sign at a bend we all knew was dangerous. No one moved for a moment. Arthur Collins shifted in his chair near the aisle. He had come in complaining that meetings were where common sense went to die, wearing his old canvas coat and holding his cane like a courtroom exhibit. His white beard was uneven, his thick eyebrows lowered in permanent suspicion, but his pale blue eyes had softened when Charlie and Tucker were brought in. Earlier, he had joked loudly that check-in lists were a polite way to tell old people they've become homework. Now he stared at the puppies and rubbed one swollen knuckle with his thumb.
Ellen looked at him. "Arthur, you had something to say about the volunteer route checks?" Arthur snorted. "I said plenty. Most of it was intelligent and ignored." "Try again," Linda said. Arthur leaned on his cane and stood with theatrical effort. "I don't need checking on. Let's get that straight before anyone starts knitting me a sympathy blanket." Mabel O'Connor raised one eyebrow from the front row, and Arthur pointed at her. "I said what I said, Mabel." A dry ripple of laughter moved through the hall. Arthur waited for it to pass. "But if some of you ladies need someone to look at generators, test batteries, and tell folks when their extension cords are trying to kill them, I am not dead yet." This time the laughter was warmer, older, a little embarrassed, a little relieved. Jean Booker lifted her hand with queenly patience. "I can organize call teams for the East Road," Mabel said. "The church kitchen can handle soup on storm nights," Linda added. "The clinic can keep the medical list, but only if people stop lying about whether they can shovel their own steps." Frank Palmer rubbed his forehead. "Temporary reflectors still cost money." Ellen tapped her pencil once. "The winter fund has a small emergency balance." "For plow repairs," Frank said. "For winter emergencies," Ellen corrected. "This qualifies." Daniel had not expected the room to turn so quickly. It did not become easy. Nothing real ever did. People still argued about who would install signs, who would call who would be liable if a volunteer slipped on ice, whether Arthur should be allowed near anyone's generator without supervision. But beneath the argument, something had shifted. The town was no longer discussing whether the problem existed. It was discussing how much responsibility it was willing to carry. Then Ellen looked at Daniel. "Commander Brooks, you came here with this proposal. You should say something before we vote." Daniel disliked speeches. Speeches often dressed emotion in polished boots and marched it around until everyone forgot where the mud was. He looked at the map, then at Margaret, then at Charlie and Tucker. Charlie was awake, chin on the towel, watching him as if still judging the quality of human leadership. Tucker slept beside the bell, small body rising and falling. Daniel stood. "When I arrived in Harbor Pines, I thought this assignment was too small," he said. His voice was quiet enough that the room had to lean toward it. "I thought route checks, supply lists, and phone trees were work for people with less training and more patience. I was wrong." He paused, and the admission cost him more than anyone there could know. "I've seen what happens when people wait for a crisis to become large before they respect it. By then, somebody is already cold, already alone, already past the point where a simple thing would have helped." No one interrupted. Daniel looked at the black X on the map. Maybe there is no small mission if it reaches a life at the right moment. The silence that followed was not the cold silence of avoidance. It was the warmer kind, the kind that sits down beside truth before deciding what to do with it. The storm returned before Harbor Pines had time to become proud of itself. By dusk, the sky had folded down over the town in a single white sheet, and the wind came off the lake with a hard, bitter voice, pushing snow across roads that had only begun to be marked. The temporary reflectors for the northern bend were still stacked inside the community station, waiting for morning. The warning sign Ellen Price had approved sat wrapped in cardboard near the door, practical, necessary, and one night too late. Inside the old firehouse, Linda Harris worked through the new check-in list with a pencil tucked behind her ear and worry sharpening her usually dry voice. Mabel O'Connor ladled soup into paper bowls for volunteers. Jean Booker folded blankets with stern elegance. Sarah Mitchell sat near Charlie and Tucker, checking their warmth with the back of her fingers while pretending she was not listening to every call Linda made. Then Linda stopped speaking. Daniel Brooks looked up from the radio table. Linda held the phone to her ear, her freckled face gone still. "Arthur Collins?" she said. No answer.
House line or cell. The room became alert in small ways. Mabel's ladle paused over the pot. Jean lowered a folded blanket. Margaret Wilson's hand tightened around the cracked brass bell in her lap. Charlie lifted his head from the crate, ears crooked but attentive, while Tucker pressed closer to the towel, still too small to understand fear, but old enough to feel it move through a room. "He said he was going home before supper," Linda said.
"He was going to check his generator." Daniel was already reaching for his coat. "Address?" "West Pine Road," Linda said. "Past the northern bend." Sarah stood at once, tall and pale in the fluorescent light, copper-brown hair escaping her knot. "I'm coming." "You're needed here," Daniel said. Sarah gave him a look sharp enough to cut rope. "I am a veterinarian, not a porcelain lamp. Arthur is 82. Cold exposure is not theoretical, and I have emergency blankets in my truck." Linda grabbed her medical bag. "Then we're all going." Margaret rose more slowly. "Wait!" She crossed the room with the careful dignity of age and placed Lucy's cracked bell into Daniel's gloved hand. The bell looked smaller than ever against his palm. "Arthur used to hear this every night," she said.
Lucy passed his road on her way to my porch. He complained about it, of course, said no respectable bell should sound like a spoon dropped in a bucket. Her mouth trembled at the corner. But he listened for it. Daniel wanted to say a bell would not help in a storm. It was not equipment. It was not a beacon. It was not enough. But he had already learned that enough was not always where rescue began. He nodded once. "I'll bring it back." Margaret looks toward Charlie and Tucker. "Bring Arthur back first." The road out of town was worse than Daniel expected, and Daniel expected bad roads as naturally as other men expected weather. Snow slid across the windshield in furious waves. Linda rode beside him, one hand braced on the dash, calling Arthur again and again, her voice changing from practical to pleading and back again. Sarah followed in her truck, headlights appearing and vanishing behind them like a second set of worried eyes. The radio coughed, static. The cell signal died exactly where Daniel's map said it would. Procedure marked the dead zone. The storm made it personal. Near mile marker 12, Daniel slowed. The northern bend opened ahead, barely visible. Even with his high beams on, the road seemed to vanish into a white mouth. Then he saw it. A dull reflection low beyond the shoulder, half hidden behind a drift. A tail light. Not moving. "Hold on," he said. Arthur's truck sat angled off the road, nose buried in snow near the same dangerous curve where Lucy had died. The engine was off. The windshield was frosted from the inside. Daniel parked at an angle to shield the scene and moved fast, Linda close behind. Sarah's truck sliding to a stop behind them. Arthur was inside, slumped but conscious, face pale beneath his white beard, gloved hands trembling in his lap. He had gone out to check on a neighbor's generator before checking his own, because pride often wore a selfish coat while hiding a generous shirt underneath. Daniel opened the door against the wind. "Arthur, look at me." Arthur's eyelids fluttered. "Told Linda," he mumbled. "Don't need babysitting." Linda appeared at Daniel's shoulder. "You are doing a poor job proving your case." Even half frozen, Arthur tried to scowl. It came out crooked. They wrapped him in emergency blankets, Sarah checking his pulse with steady hands while Daniel cleared snow from around the door. The wind roared so hard that ordinary words broke apart. On instinct or memory or something deeper than either, Daniel lifted the cracked bell and shook it once. The sound was almost ridiculous in the storm, thin, bent, out of tune. Arthur's eyes opened wider. "That dog come back?" he whispered. Daniel crouched beside him. Snow collected on his beard and shoulders. For a moment, no answer felt right. Lucy had not come back. The road had not been fixed in time. Late was still late.
Loss did not become gentle just because people learned from it. "No," Daniel said at last. "But she left the bell." Arthur closed his eyes, and one tear slipped into the white of his beard before the wind could claim it. After the storm, Harbor Pines did not transform like a town in a painting. It changed like old wood taking stain, slowly, unevenly, but for good. The reflectors went up along the northern bend. The warning sign was installed before the next snowfall. A small emergency signal repeater was mounted near the dead zone after Ellen found a state grant, and Frank Palmer complained through every form he signed. The winter check-in list became less like a record of weakness and more like a chain of porch lights. People grumbled, then answered. Some even called first. Charlie and Tucker grew stronger by inches. Tucker stayed with Margaret because the smaller puppy needed slow songs, soft floors, and a woman patient enough to let trust arrive late. Charlie remained with Daniel during the extended community training because the larger puppy liked order, boots, and watching doors as if heaven had indeed hired him. The brothers met every day at the community station. Sarah called it puppy visitation rights. Arthur declared himself their honorary grandfather, even after Charlie chewed the corner off one of his gloves with great professional seriousness. On a pale afternoon, with light snow falling over a quieter road, Margaret hung Lucy's cracked bell by the community station door. It did not ring sweetly when the wind touched it. It never would. Daniel stood beside Charlie while Margaret sat with Tucker in her lap. Sarah and Linda worked over the night call list at the table. No one in the room was fully healed. Lucy was still gone. Some help had still come late. But each crooked note moved through Harbor Pines like a promise made carefully this time. Listen sooner, look closer, and do not wait for a small life to stand alone in the snow before deciding it matters. Maybe the miracle in this story was not that the storm stopped or that every wound disappeared. Maybe the miracle was that a broken bell still made people listen. Lucy was gone, and that truth still hurts. But what she left behind changed a road, a town, and a man who had forgotten that duty without tenderness can become another kind of silence. In everyday life, we often wait for pain to become loud before we answer it. An old neighbor stops calling. A lonely porch light stays on. A small creature trembles where no one is looking. And sometimes God does not send thunder from heaven. Sometimes He sends a cracked bell, 2 frightened puppies, and one person willing to stop. I hope this story reminds you to listen sooner, love more gently, and never overlook the small lives placed in your path. Share your thoughts or memories in the comments. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for more stories of mercy, courage, and hope. May God bless you and keep you safe wherever you are watching from.